So sometime around 2018, podcasts became like this background track to my life, and I didn't even realize it, right? Because I would throw them on at work, I'd throw them on at the gym, walking around somewhere, and even before bed, If there's anything that didn't require my full attention, I'm throwing on a podcast in the background. I think, like a lot of people my age, I had gotten sick of the short form slop that we've been consuming for years, right? So throwing on podcasts didn't feel as, detrimental. Like, it was not only entertaining, but it also felt like I was learning some shit at the same time. And now my perspective on podcasts is actually different. And yeah, like, I'll still listen to one every once in a while, but I don't view them as this harmless thing that needs to be in the background of every dull moment that I have, right? And it's for the better. And I also want to talk about how just the quality of these podcasts has really just changed, especially after 2020. So today, let's talk about why I'm off podcasts. So a big part of the reason that I initially fell in love with these podcasts, like Joe Rogan, for example, was because I was bored. I was 18, I was working as a doorman, and that's a job where I would have to sit for 8 hours in a lobby, right? And you spend the majority of that time doing nothing. So podcasts were like this perfect fix. It was a perfect discovery, right? Because I could, all of a sudden, my shifts would go by a little faster because I could, listen to them just yap and maybe laugh or even learn a thing or two while also getting paid, right? And then even after this job and after college, once I got a corporate job, I would just bounce from podcast to podcast while working through these mind-numbing spreadsheets. It's like you're part of a conversation when you're listening to a podcast, right? But you don't need to participate in it. So it just ends up making time go by faster, and then these shifts a little bit less torturous, right? And this has been me for years. Podcasts in the background of whatever I'm doing. It's almost like subconscious, right? And this probably doesn't sound that bad, and it really isn't, depending how you look at it. But at some point, I realized it was just like all this other shit that I already hated, right? And I already identified this other shit as being bad, but for some reason, podcasts were kind of disguised, right? But what it really was, I realized, was just another way of me, avoiding having to sit there with my own thoughts, right? That need to always put on a someone else, a distraction in the background, was actually more significant than I thought. It wasn't just me being bored, right? So I hated my corporate job. You guys know this, and I think the way that things ended up being a blessing from God, because like, despite how much I hated it and I knew it wasn't me, I stayed there for 3 years. And if I didn't get screwed by corporate politics and stand up for myself, I'd probably be there right now, right? But instead of having to sit there and accept my reality at the time, which was how miserable I was and how much I hated it and didn't want to be there, and how much it wasn't me, how I could get out of it, how I could move forward, what I would do is I would just, throw on a podcast, open up those spreadsheets, and ignore my own thoughts, my own kind of cognitive dissonance, right? So you might be asking, why are you bringing this up? What does this have to do with podcasts? Podcasts allowed me to not sit with my own thoughts, right? I could just listen to someone else, like someone else talking, about their shit that they got going on, and I could think that, oh, okay, I'm learning, this is entertaining. But it somehow took me years to realize that constantly listening to someone else's ideas, someone else's opinions, someone else's thoughts on their life could have a negative impact on my life and where I stand with my own life, goals, thoughts, feelings, right? I think it's so easy right now to just tune out your own mind and just, dive into the noise. The noise is all around us, right? But I think this is a big reason why a lot of people feel lost right now, because independent thinking has become like this skill in 2025, right? We always talk about overthinking and how that's bad, but no one talks about underthinking. And I was underthinking for 3 fucking years of my life. It's like you don't even need to think anymore. You can just wake up and there's so much content to be consumed, whether that's podcasts, YouTube videos. It's like you can go an entire day without thinking, about your own problems. And I don't want to get too deep right now, but I just think a lot of answers that we're looking for are in our own heads, and we just aren't listening, right? And I think this is a big reason that individuality is basically gone right now, because everyone's just getting the same recycled takes that they got from somewhere else, right? And they're spewing those. And it's just kind of like some Black Mirror shit, man. And this isn't to say that there aren't things that we can learn from other people and other people's lives and their perspective on life, but it is to say that we shouldn't ignore our own, right? We shouldn't be substituting our own thoughts and our own problems by just, diving into that noise. And just, that's what I've been doing for, a long time without even realizing it. So that's a big reason that, I've stopped listening to so many podcasts. I'm just trying to listen to myself more, you know what I mean? Like listen to what I have to think, what I have to say inside. And like ever since I started doing this, I just feel like my life has gotten way better, right? Because I have a better understanding of where I want to be, what I want to do, and where I'm trying to go. And like for years, I couldn't answer, even come close to answering those questions, right? And I think constantly listening to that noise is a reason for that, right? So to my next point, I feel like the novelty of a lot of these podcasts kind of wore off. Like there's only so many times that someone can come onto a show and have something new or valuable to say, right? Like first time I saw, like for example, Elon, or like even like someone like Jordan Peterson when I was like 18, I was like, wow, this is cool. Like I never heard of any of this shit. Like this is interesting, I'm learning, right? But now it's like, okay, that was a fucking dumb long ago, and they're still coming on all the time. It's like there's like we kind of get the gist already, right? Like, and this might be more, personal, but I don't know, I was just like, I feel like I was learning a ton of shit when I was younger, but now it's like this shit really just scratches the surface in terms of learning, right? Because when I was younger, I didn't know what reading a book was. So, listening to a 2-hour podcast and learning one little thing would be like, oh, I'm learning, you know what I mean? But now it's like, if I could sit down and read a book for 2 hours, you know how much more I could learn, as opposed to like one of these stupid podcasts. It's really, I realized it's like, in terms of knowledge and learning shit, like this is really just scratching the surface, right? Like whether that's self-help shit, history, health related things, like these podcasts can teach you things, and it's pretty cool that you can learn like that. But reading a book is like, maybe it's just me, but I just feel like as I've gotten older, like I think reading, if I spent all that time when I was a doorman and I was reading books, like, oh my god, like I'd be the world's smartest fucking doorman ever, right? But when you're younger, obviously reading for whatever reason is just like not something you want to do. So I think just getting older and starting to enjoy reading books, I'd say definitely played a role in my like recent disinterest in podcasts, right? So my next point, just like everything else did, in 2020, podcasts changed drastically, right? So a huge appeal of these podcasts for me at first was their ability, like I said, it just put that shit on, and it's like you're part of a conversation, but you don't have to contribute to that conversation. So it's perfect background noise, right? They were just conversations. And then after the pandemic, this changed, right? Podcasts became like this political platform, and because everyone was so lonely and stuck at the crib, they exploded in popularity, and they just became super powerful platforms to spread messages on, right? So obviously that's going to have an effect on, the vibes. So now it's like every politician or Silicon Valley head is like itching to get onto these podcasts to spew their fucking propaganda, right? Like Bernie Sanders, Zuckerberg, Elon, Trump. These are very different guests than when I started watching, the Joe Rogan podcast, for example. It was like Joey Diaz, I think regardless of where you stand politically, it's pretty insane to think about the fact that, the Joe Rogan podcast played a role in the 2024 election, right? It's not like it's anyone's fault, that it's not Joe Rogan's fault that he's now like got the most powerful voice in all of media, but it plays a role for me personally. Like it's become too big. It lacks this, genuine energy that it used to have, and that's just me. When things get so big and so commercial, they're not as appealing to me. They feel fake to me, right? Which leads me to my next point. I think that podcasts have done irreversible damage to the comedy scene in general, right? Like, for some reason, comedians and podcasts are like peanut butter and fucking jelly. And it's like all these guys have podcasts now, but none of them are saying anything on their podcast. They're just terrible. So Andrew Schulz is this comedian from New York, and he's got this podcast, and it pulls in millions and millions of views. So I was like, all right, it must be good. Like, let me give it a chance. And it was just like objectively a hard watch, man. Like, he's making these jokes that suck, right? But he's got this little giggle squad that just does these loud fake laughs at every little joke. And I don't know, like, if you think it's funny, that's totally, like, comedy is an opinion thing, right? But for me, it's like, oh my god, this is brutal to watch, like, these fake laughs and just these deliveries of these jokes. It's just painful. And he's not the only one with this setup, right? And it reminds me of this 2016, or not 2016, whenever David Dobrik was making vlogs with those fake laughs in the background. It's like everything's just wrapped in this fake plastic shell. And I think podcasts have now gotten to that point, right? Obviously, comedians are huge in the podcast space, and me personally, I don't find comedians funny. Like, the comedians we got these days, I don't know if my humor is just broken from the internet, but like, I'll laugh harder at like an Instagram comment than anything a comedian has to say, right? So I think the explosion of the Joe Rogan podcast specifically has done like undeniable, irreversible damage to the comedy scene. Like, now there's just this huge list of quote unquote comedians that literally, just because they were boys with Joe Rogan, they all now have like Netflix specials, and they each have like 20 podcasts. And I think it's just killing comedy, because these are now, you're telling me these guys like Andrew Schulz, Bert Kreischer, Tom Segura, like, these guys are the top comedians, is what you're telling me right now? These are the guys going on stadium tours? It's just, I don't know. This is obviously like less deep, but it's just, it kind of pisses me off, I'm not going to lie, because these guys have never once gotten a laugh out of me, and it's not like I haven't consumed their fucking jokes, because they're everywhere, right? And this brings me to my next point, also not that deep, but these ads. Oh my god, these podcast ads, bro. Like, if I have to listen to one more Blue Chew or mAnScApeD or HelloFresh NordVPN ad, like, I'm gonna tweak out, right? For some reason, it's just the same few brands, and they're dumping millions and millions of dollars into these podcasts, and I'm just sick of it, right? I'm someone who hates ads. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I cannot stand advertisements. Like TV ads, I can't comprehend. Like, they're so bad, I actually can't comprehend them. And like YouTube ads, I hate them so much. I pay mad money every single year to not have to watch them. So then, like, when I'm listening to a podcast and I have to hear about mAnScApeD for the millionth time, I just like glitch out, right? And podcasts specifically are like made to be monetized, I've realized. Like, especially with the way that the YouTube algorithm works, which is based on, it just wants the viewer to be watching the video for as long as possible, right? So naturally, a 2-hour podcast, they're going to be watching the video longer than a 10-minute video. So that's why podcasts get pushed so hard in the algorithm. That's why they're always being recommended to you. But that's also why they're so, monetizable, and that's why all these companies dump millions and millions of dollars into them. But I just can't stand it, man. As someone who used to be in digital marketing, like, the whole thing just drives me nuts, right? So this is a little bit of a personal rant, but like, I think if it was maybe if we can get some different fucking companies up in here, maybe it wouldn't piss me off so much. But it's like every single podcast, Blue Chew, mAnScApeD, AG1, it's like, I don't know, man. It just drives me nuts. I'm sorry, this one doesn't really make sense. I just had to rant about that. But yeah, that's a few reasons. But yeah, those are the reasons that I'm off the podcast. And this is not to say I'll never listen to a podcast again, or, there aren't good podcasts being made. This is just my perspective and how it's changed. And, if there's anything that I want someone to take out of this video, it's probably that first point I made about listening to your own thoughts, even though it's uncomfortable to sit there and think. Don't feel the need to, cover every dull moment with some type of stimulation from your phone. Just the reason I keep harping on that is because, like, it wasn't until I stopped doing that and I unplugged and sat there with myself, whether that's through like meditating or just not consuming for a minute even, like, things start to fall in place, right? And they're still falling in place. And I think if I didn't make that realization, I would be fucking lost still. So yeah, that's really it, guys. Thank you so much for all the love. We got like 17,000 subscribers. It's fucking insane. I never would have thought in a million years that would be a thing. I love you guys. I'll talk to you later. Peace.